Level 1. The chair. The overdraft notice on your phone reads -$187, and you're sitting in your truck outside a gas station on Route 9 at 6 in the evening. The rent is $1,400, due Friday, and the contract gig pays next Thursday. And the 4 months since the layoff have been a series of gaps exactly like this one. 4 months ago, the VP read the new org chart in conference room B, and the promotion you'd been promised for 18 months went to a 28-year-old who'd started 6 months before. The VP didn't look at you when he said it, and the fluorescent tube above the projector flickered twice, and the guy next to you shifted in his seat like he already knew. When you asked why after the room cleared, the VP looked at you the way someone checks a shipping number, calm and certain, and what he said ended 11 years in one sentence. You should be grateful you still have a chair. Mike Telf. He said it without malice, the way someone states a quantity. And that was worse than anger because it meant he meant it. And 6 weeks later, they walked you out with a cardboard box. The security guard wouldn't make eye contact because he'd been trained not to, and you set the box on the passenger seat and drove home and didn't tell your wife for 2 hours. Now it's March and you go inside the gas station for gas you can't afford, and a Powerball quick pick that costs $2 you don't have, an impulse you can't explain to anyone. The fluorescent hum inside the station is a frequency you feel in your teeth, and the scratch-off display glows under plastic like small promises nobody keeps, and the clerk doesn't look up. 3 days later, you're checking the numbers on your phone in the dark, sitting on the edge of the bed at 6:15 in the morning, and the first 3 numbers match. You check them again with your thumb hovering over the screen like it might change the result, and then a third time, and the screen reads $50 million. The cash option is approximately $28 million, and your hands go still in a way they've never been still before, and the bedroom is dark, and your wife is asleep, and the phone is the only light. The number doesn't feel like money yet. It feels like a trapdoor opening under your feet, and the first thing that arrives isn't joy, but the VP's voice saying you should be grateful. And then the understanding, crystalline and immediate, that you never have to be grateful for anything again, followed by the question that forms before the joy does. Can you claim it without your name ever appearing anywhere? Level 2, the blind trust. Your attorney's office is on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and the elevator stops an inch below the floor, so you have to step up to exit, a flaw the building manager has never fixed. She's an estate lawyer who handles high-net-worth clients, and her pen is a cheap ballpoint that doesn't match her suit, which tells you she's careful with her own money and therefore careful with yours. Your state allows lottery claims through a blind trust, which means your name goes into a sealed envelope at the Lottery Commission but doesn't appear in the public database that journalists and cousins and strangers search. The trust is called Meridian Holdings, and the claiming entity is a limited liability company registered in Wyoming, where member names don't appear in public filings, and the registered agent is a corporate service that forwards mail and asks nothing. It takes 11 days to set everything up, and during those 11 days, you carry the ticket in a plastic bag inside your boot because paper burns and paper gets lost, and paper is the only thing standing between you and the life you're trying to build. The Lottery Commission office smells like industrial carpet and stale coffee, and the woman who processes the claim doesn't blink at the trust structure because she's seen it before, and the sealed envelope goes into a cabinet and the wire gets initiated. The federal government withholds 24% at the source, and the actual tax liability at the top marginal rate is 37%, which means you owe more at filing, and your accountant sets aside the difference in a separate account. When the wire hits 17 days after the drawing, the number is just under $18 million, and the bank's fraud department calls within the hour, and you verify and confirm and then sit in the kitchen looking at the balance on a laptop. The number looks fake, the way a stage prop looks fake. Too clean and too large to be real, and you sit with it for a long time before doing anything at all. Your wife knows because you told her on day 2, sitting at the kitchen table after her shift. And she didn't cry or laugh. She just sat down slowly and took off her shoes and said she needed to think. You understood because you needed to think too. And the thinking took the form of spreadsheets and attorney calls and account structures, while her thinking took a form you couldn't see and didn't ask about. The first things you pay off are the rent, the overdraft, the truck payment, and the 2 credit cards you'd been rotating like a shell game. And then you stop because the money is finite and the request will come. You set up a brokerage account with $12 million in treasury bills and index funds. And the remaining $5 goes into a high-yield account that generates roughly $16,000 a month in interest alone. You don't buy a car, and you don't buy a house, and you don't quit the contract gig. You just stop being afraid of the mail. And that alone feels like a different species of life. But at night, when the house is quiet and your wife is asleep, you find yourself thinking about the VP. Not about revenge, but about the fact that he'll never know what he did. And that fact sits in your chest like something undigested. You start pulling public records on a Tuesday evening, not sure what you're looking for, just following a thread of curiosity that feels harmless until it isn't. Level 3, the public record. The county clerk's website is a database from the late 90s, and it takes 20 minutes to find the search function. But once you do, the VP's name pulls up 7 documents in a list. The first is a mortgage from 2019 on a house assessed at $640,000, and the second is a home equity line of credit for $200,000, drawn in 2022. The third is a commercial code filing from 2023, a personal guarantee on a business loan for $900,000, secured against the VP's personal assets and recorded for anyone to see. You sit back in your chair because a personal guarantee means the VP put his house and savings on the line for a business venture, and the filing means the lender recorded it publicly, which is standard and also a window you can see through. The logistics company filed its articles in 2021, and the registered agent is the VP's brother-in-law. And the business address is a warehouse on the south side of the interstate that you pass every day. The company's last annual report shows revenue declining for 2 consecutive years, and the officer list is just the VP and his brother-in-law. And the registered address has a typo in it that nobody corrected, which tells you how carefully they're running things. Then you find the lawsuit. A supplier filing a breach of contract claim 7 months ago seeking $310,000, and the VP's company hasn't responded, which means a default judgment is likely already in motion. The picture assembles itself through filings and liens and continuations, and the man is leveraged to the hilt and sinking. And the precarity looks familiar because it's the same precarity you lived in 3 weeks ago, just scaled up and dressed in a bigger house. Then you find the debt listing on a secondary broker site, a non-performing personal loan with an original face value of $600,000, originated by a private lender and secured by a personal guarantee from a debtor whose name you recognize. The asking price is 12 cents on the dollar, which means $72,000, buys $600,000 in collection rights against the man who told you to be grateful for a chair. You stare at the listing and the cursor blinks on the screen and the sound of a television laugh track bleeds through the wall from the next room where your wife is watching something. You close the laptop and sit with what you found. And the question isn't whether you can afford it, because you can afford it the way you can afford a cup of coffee. The question is what you become the moment you own a piece of another man's collapse, and whether that question matters more or less than the one that's been keeping you awake. Level 4, the assignment. The debt broker in Tampa takes your call, and his voice sounds like 3 packs a day and a divorce he hasn't processed yet, and he doesn't ask for identification beyond the wire instructions. You use a prepaid cell registered to the Wyoming company, and you identify yourself as the managing member of Meridian Capital Partners, and the broker treats you like any other small fund looking for distressed paper. The purchase agreement is 8 pages, and your attorney reviews it in 45 minutes and adds 2 clauses: a confidentiality rider and an indemnification against any prior collection violations by the original lender. You wire $72,000 from the business account, and 3 days later, a courier envelope arrives at your attorney's office containing the original promissory note and a single-page assignment of debt, notarized and dated. Your attorney records the assignment with the county clerk that afternoon, and you are now the legal creditor of the man who humiliated you. And he has no idea because debt assignments don't require debtor notification until collection begins. Your attorney explains the rules carefully. You can demand payment, negotiate a settlement, accelerate the loan under the default clause, sue to enforce, or forgive the debt at any time for any reason without explanation. You sit with the fact that you hold the legal right to either destroy or release this man, and he has no say in either outcome. And the power is structural rather than personal. which makes it cleaner. The first collection notice goes out on a Thursday. A formal demand letter on Meridian letterhead sent certified mail to the VP's home address, requesting full payment of $600,000 plus accrued interest within 30 days. Your attorney signs it as authorized agent. And the letter gives a post office box in Wyoming for correspondence and no phone number, because you don't want a conversation. You want the silence to do the work. The certified mail tracking shows delivery on a Saturday morning, and you imagine him opening it at the kitchen counter with coffee, the way you opened the overdraft notice in your truck, and the symmetry is precise. Then your attorney forwards something from the loan package the original lender included, a business plan the VP submitted when he applied for the $600,000 loan, and you open the file at 11 at night. The business plan contains an organizational chart with names and positions, and your eyes move down the staffing section and find a line item for your old position. And next to it, in the VP's handwriting, a note makes your fingers go numb on the trackpad. Level 5, the margin note. The note is in the VP's handwriting, 3 lines in the margin of a business plan, and the words are precise and unhurried. Retain current level. Chew valuable to promote. Backfill cost exceeds upside. Tatzabar. 11 words in the VP's handwriting, and they reframe 11 years of your life, and the kitchen counter under your elbows feels like the only solid thing in the room. You read it 3 times, then a 4th with your finger on the screen tracing each word, because your brain keeps trying to soften it and the words refuse to soften. It wasn't that you weren't good enough, and it wasn't that the 28-year-old was better. It was that you were too useful where you were, and promoting you would have cost the VP money in backfill and training. You were held in place, deliberately and by calculation, not overlooked, but identified and assessed and frozen. Because your competence was an asset to him and your advancement was a cost, and the spreadsheet made the decision. You set the laptop on the counter and stand there, and the refrigerator hums in the silence, and the overhead light buzzes at a frequency that suddenly seems very loud, like the room is amplifying things you weren't meant to hear. Your wife finds you at midnight standing in the kitchen with your coat still on, and she asks what's wrong, and you almost tell her, but the words rearrange themselves on the way out. You tell her it's nothing, that you couldn't sleep, and the lie comes out smooth and easy, and that's the first time you lie to her about the debt, and it won't be the last. The next morning you call your attorney and ask what collection options apply maximum legal pressure without litigation, and he explains acceleration, credit reporting, and demand cycling, each one a turn of the screw that's standard practice and entirely legal. The loan agreement contains a default on demand clause, which means you can declare the entire balance immediately due and refuse partial payments, and you authorize the acceleration that afternoon, and your attorney sends the notice by certified mail. The notice arrives at the VP's house on a Wednesday, and tracking confirms delivery at 10:42 in the morning, and it demands full payment of $642,000, including accrued interest, within 15 days. 15 days. And the VP doesn't have $60,000, let alone $600,000. And you know this because you've seen his filings and his liens and his company's declining revenue, and the screws tighten with mechanical precision. The VP's attorney calls your attorney's office on day 4, professional and measured, requesting documentation of the assignment and validation of the amount owed. And your attorney provides everything because the chain of custody is clean and unbroken. But the VP's attorney also asks, in writing, for the identity of the beneficial owner of Meridian Capital Partners. And your attorney responds that state law in Wyoming doesn't require disclosure of member information for limited liability companies. The request itself is a signal. Someone on the other side is asking who you are. And the privacy laws are strong but not impenetrable. And the question hangs in the air like a door someone is testing to see if it's locked. Level 6. The acceleration. Business credit for the VP's company drops 41 points in the first week after the Commercial Credit Bureau filing, and your attorney monitors it as a standard part of the collection process and forwards the updates. Supplier lawsuit defaults as expected, and the judgment for $310,000 lands on the VP's company the same week your acceleration notice expires. And now 2 creditors circle the same sinking ship. You watch through filings and credit reports and public records, the way a man watches a weather system on radar, detached and technical and aware of the damage, but not standing in its path. The VP's attorney proposes a payment plan of $1,400 a month on a $640,000 debt, which is less than your old rent, and the math is either an insult or a cry for help. You instruct your attorney to reject it with no counteroffer, and the response is a single line stating that Meridian Capital Partners doesn't accept partial payment arrangements on accelerated obligations. Then comes a lump sum offer of $100,000 in settlement, which means someone in the VP's life has liquidity they're willing to deploy, and $100,000 is real money to most people. But you don't need $100,000. And the point was never the money. And the point was never the debt. And you're only now beginning to understand what the point actually is, which is something the money can't reach. You reject the settlement, and your attorney pauses before sending the rejection. And you see the question in the pause, but he doesn't ask it because he's paid not to ask it. The VP's house goes into pre-foreclosure 19 days later when the primary mortgage holder files a notice of default for 2 missed payments, and the home equity lender follows within the week. You didn't cause the missed payments. The VP's collapse was already in motion before you bought the debt, but your acceleration and credit filings compressed the timeline. And you know this and sit with it. Your wife stands in the doorway at 2 in the morning while you're on the laptop checking public records, and she watches you the way you watch an animal that started behaving strangely. You haven't been sleeping. She says it as a statement, not a question, and you close the laptop and tell her it's the portfolio. That managing the money is harder than you expected, and she nods but doesn't believe you. That's the second lie. And it sits between you at breakfast like a third person at the table, and neither of you acknowledges it, and the orange juice tastes like nothing in your mouth. The VP's attorney files a motion demanding Meridian produce its operating agreement and member information. And the judge strikes that paragraph but doesn't sanction the attorney, which means the court tolerates the question even if it won't answer it. The attorney is probing for the seam in the anonymity, methodical and patient and funded by a man who has nothing left to lose, and the seam exists even if he hasn't found it yet. Level 7. The glass wall. Your attorney arranges a mandatory settlement conference because the court requires one before collection litigation proceeds, and the conference is in a mediator's office on the 8th floor with a glass wall between rooms. You're not supposed to be there. Creditors rarely attend in person. They send counsel, but you tell your attorney you want to observe, and he arranges it through a closed circuit feed in the adjacent observation room. The audio comes through a speaker above the doorframe, thin and metallic, and the glass wall shows the conference room like a diorama. 6 chairs and a table and water pitchers and overhead lights designed for small surrenders. The VP walks in at 9:15 in the morning, and he looks older than you remember. His shirt pressed but his collar fraying, and the watch on his wrist is the same watch from 4 years ago. He sits across from your attorney, who he's never met, and the mediator explains the process in the measured tones of a man who has watched 100 small surrenders in rooms exactly like this one. Your attorney opens with the full figure, $642,000 payable within 60 days with a confessed judgment provision if payment fails, and the number lands on the table like a physical object. The VP's attorney counters with $50,000 cash and a promissory note for the balance, and the mediator suggests $200,000 as a midpoint, and your attorney rejects it without consulting you because you've already instructed him. No settlement under any terms. And the conference is performative now, a procedural step between the filing and the lawsuit, and everyone in the room knows it except possibly the VP, who still thinks negotiation is possible. The VP's attorney asks for a recess. The mediator grants 10 minutes, and the VP stands and walks to the window and looks out at the parking lot 8 floors below, and his shoulders are different than you remember. Then he turns to his attorney and speaks, and the microphone picks it up barely, and you lean forward in your chair and the words come through the speaker like they're traveling through water. I had a guy working for me years ago. The VP's attorney murmurs something inaudible, and the VP shakes his head and looks back out the window with an expression that's reflective rather than regretful. He probably thinks I ruined his career. 200. The mediator calls everyone back, and the VP returns to his chair, and his right thumb presses against the table hard enough to whiten the nail, and you watch this through the glass. The conference ends in impasse, and your attorney files the notice that afternoon, And the collection lawsuit is now inevitable, and the VP will be deposed and his assets disclosed under oath. But what stays with you isn't the legal outcome, it's the VP's voice through that speaker. Casual and unburdened, describing the logic of keeping you small, as if he were explaining inventory rotation. He doesn't regret it, and he doesn't remember it as something that happened to a person. He remembers it as resource allocation. And the resource was you. And owning his debt doesn't change the fact that he never saw you as one. You drive home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. And the silence in the truck is so complete you can hear the tires on the asphalt. And you don't know what you feel. You thought holding the VP's financial life would feel like justice. But it feels like reading the same margin note from a different angle. And the angle doesn't change the words. The VP didn't humiliate you because he was cruel. He humiliated you because you were a line item. And line items don't have feelings. And that, not the debt and not the money, is the thing you can't forgive. Level 8, the reveal. The VP's attorney makes a move you didn't anticipate. He serves a subpoena on the Wyoming registered agent demanding Meridian's operating agreement and formation documents, and the agent forwards it to your attorney's office that evening. Your attorney calls with a tone you haven't heard before, cautious and measured. The voice of a man calculating risk the way an engineer calculates load. And he explains that the subpoena is overbroad and can be challenged. But the judge may order limited discovery into Meridian's structure to confirm it's not a shell entity used for harassment. And if that happens, the operating agreement becomes discoverable, and member information follows. The anonymity has a crack in it now, not broken but visible, and the VP's attorney is pressing on it with the patience of a man whose client has nothing left to lose and nothing but time. Your attorney lays out two options: fight the subpoena and risk a court order, or settle the debt and dissolve the company before the structure is exposed. And he recommends the second because the first invites scrutiny you don't need. There's a third option he doesn't suggest because it's irrational and personal and the kind of decision a lawyer exists to prevent. And it forms in your mind fully before you finished weighing the other two. 3 days later, you're sitting in your truck outside the VP's office building at 7 in the morning. And the parking lot is empty except for his car. And you know it's his because you remember the plate from 4 years ago. You walk in through the side entrance where the code hasn't changed, 1719, because the building manager was always lazy about security. And the hallway smells the same. Industrial cleaner and carpet that should have been replaced a decade ago. The VP's door is open, and he's at his desk reading something on his screen, and he doesn't look up when you knock on the frame because he assumes it's an employee, and then he looks up. His face goes through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and then something between caution and the early edge of fear, and he doesn't stand. You sit down in the chair across from his desk without being invited, and the chair is the same chair with cracked vinyl on the armrest. And your hands rest on the same surface they rested on 4 years ago. I bought your debt. Top. 4 words, and the VP's pen stops moving, and the office is quiet except for the ventilation pushing air through the ceiling, and his face changes again into something you can't read. He doesn't speak for a long time, and he sets the pen down carefully, aligning it with the edge of a legal pad, and you watch his hands because his hands will tell you what his face won't. You name the debt and the private loan and Meridian Capital Partners. And the VP's eyes change when you say the name because he's been hearing that name on demand letters for weeks, and now it has a face. The VP says slowly that a man laid off 4 years ago buying $600,000 in debt on the secondary market takes money and motivation. And the question of where both came from is assembling itself behind his eyes. You tell him about the lottery, the $50 million, the trust in the company, and the words leave your mouth with the flat certainty of something you can't take back. And you understand this is the irreversible action. The VP sits very still with his hands flat on the desk, the same way they were flat on the mediation table. And his right thumb presses the wood the same way it did then. And he looks at you for a long time. Now what? Dash. 2 words. And they hang in the air of that office with its industrial cleaner smell and its fluorescent hum and its cracked vinyl chair. And you don't have an answer because you didn't plan past this moment. Level 9, the price. You don't have an answer to the VP's question. So you stand and walk out of the office without saying anything else. and the hallway is longer going back than it was coming in. And the code on the side door works the same. 3 days later, the VP's attorney sends a letter to your attorney's office, and the letter doesn't propose a settlement or payment plan. It proposes something else entirely. The letter says the VP is prepared to file a complaint alleging malicious prosecution, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and that his counsel has identified circumstantial evidence linking Meridian to a recent anonymous lottery claim. The letter says the complaint will be public, and the lottery winner's anonymity will be a matter of court record, and the story of a lottery winner stalking a former boss through the debt market will be available to every journalist who searches the filing. The letter says the VP is willing to forego the complaint in exchange for debt forgiveness and a payment of $200,000, and it gives your attorney 14 days to respond. Your attorney calls and reads the letter to you and then says nothing for 4 seconds. And the silence on the line is the sound of a professional recalibrating his understanding of a situation he thought he understood. He tells you the debt purchase was legal and the collection actions were proper, and the VP's claims likely won't survive a motion to dismiss. But the complaint itself is the weapon, not the verdict. A public filing linking your name to the lottery win ends the anonymity regardless of whether the claims succeed in court, and the VP knows this, and his attorney knows this, and that's the leverage. You sit in the kitchen with the letter on the counter, and your wife is at the sink washing dishes. And she sees the letter and asks what it is. And this time you can't lie because the letter has her address on it. You tell her everything. The VP, the debt, the margin note, the collection, the settlement conference, the office visit. All of it in a flat voice that doesn't pause for a reaction. And the water runs in the sink and she doesn't turn it off. She stands with her back to you and her hands in the soapy water, and she doesn't move for a long time, and then she turns off the faucet and dries her hands on a towel and sits down across from you. You had $17 million, and you chose this. Members wealth. 8 words. And they land in the kitchen the way the VP's sentence landed in conference room B. Not with malice, but with a fact that reorganizes everything you've told yourself about what you were doing. You don't have a response because she's right. And the rightness of it presses behind your forehead like the start of a headache, and the kitchen is quiet except for the refrigerator doing its low mechanical work. The VP wants $200,000 and a signed agreement. And your attorney recommends paying it because the cost of fighting exceeds the cost of the settlement, and the anonymity is worth more than the principal. But the principal is the only thing that's yours, the only thing the money didn't buy. And paying the VP to stay quiet means the man who held you small profits from the holding. And that calculation runs in circles all night. Level 10, the release. Sleep doesn't come that night. And by morning, you've made a decision that isn't the one your attorney recommended, and isn't the one the VP demanded, and isn't the one that satisfies anyone fully, including you. You call your attorney and instruct him to forgive the debt, all $642,000 of it, and to return the original promissory note to the VP's attorney marked paid in full. You instruct him to refuse the $200,000 payment demand, to refuse any non-disclosure agreement, to refuse any signed settlement of any kind, and to communicate only that the debt is forgiven and Meridian Capital Partners is dissolved. Your attorney pauses for 5 seconds, which is longer than his usual pause, and then he says he'll need it in writing. And you send the instructions by email within the hour, and he executes them by close of business. The promissory note goes back in a courier envelope with a single cover letter stating the debt is satisfied with no further obligation and no signature from you because your name appears nowhere in the Meridian documents, and it never will. You're betting on the VP's pride. Because a public complaint means the VP has to explain in open court that he personally guaranteed $900,000 in failing business loans and that his house was in pre-foreclosure. The VP's story is more embarrassing than yours. And a man who once told you to be grateful for a chair is not a man who will voluntarily sit in a courtroom and explain how the chair ended up being his. The VP never files the complaint. And 14 days pass, then 30, then 60. And your attorney monitors the court docket and nothing appears. And the silence confirms what you calculated about pride being a better shield than any legal argument. Your wife doesn't leave, but she doesn't come back all at once either. And the first week she sleeps with her back to you, and the second week she starts asking questions about the money and the structure and the plan. You tell her everything she asks about and some things she doesn't. And the conversations happen at the kitchen table over coffee that goes cold. And the process is slow and unglamorous and nothing like the way reconciliation looks in stories about reconciliation. You move to a smaller house in a town 40 miles from where you lived, paid in cash, nothing flashy, a 3-bedroom with a yard that needs work, and a garage where you can fix things with your hands. The contract gig ends, and you don't replace it, but you volunteer 3 mornings a week at a warehouse that distributes food to pantries, running logistics because logistics is what you know, and the work feels like the work you used to do before it became a career. The $12 million in the brokerage account grows at roughly 7% annually, and the interest covers the taxes and the house and the life you're building, and the number on the statement is large enough to forget about, which is the only kind of large number worth having. Some nights you sit on the back porch, and the yard is dark and the crickets are loud, and you think about the VP, not with anger and not with satisfaction, but with a kind of puzzled neutrality, like looking at an old injury that still aches but no longer limits you. The margin note exists somewhere in a file on a laptop you no longer open. 11 words in another man's handwriting that once felt like a verdict and now feel like an artifact from a life you stepped out of. You never learn what the VP does next, whether he keeps the house or loses it, whether the business survives or folds, because you stop checking the public records the way an alcoholic stops buying lottery tickets, one day at a time, and some days are harder than others. The promissory note is in a drawer in the garage, stamped paid in full in your attorney's handwriting, and you don't look at it and you don't throw it away. And the drawer stays closed because opening it would mean deciding what it means. And you're not ready for that. What you know is this. You held absolute power over the man who reduced you to a line item, and you used some of it, and then you stopped. And the stopping cost you more than the using, and that cost was the point. The VP will never know why you stopped. And you will never know if stopping was mercy or exhaustion or self-preservation. And the not knowing is the one thing the money couldn't clarify. And it sits with you on the porch in the dark, unresolved, the way the best questions do.